Hey, Guru Nation and brand new, theclinicalscoop.com. Welcome. Thank you very much for watching. This is Dan Sfera. Today, I'm interviewing Brett Klegger. Brett is the Chief Commercial Officer at DrugDev. Okay, he was their first U.S. employee. Brett, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Appreciate it.
Hey, we got a lot to talk about. We want to get into your company's latest news and headlines, DrugDev Spark. But before we get into that, okay, I want to find out more about you. Who are you? How did you get started in this industry? And then how did you start working for DrugDev?
Good question. So I'm a recovering attorney by nature, so I practiced law through most of the 90s.
Okay.
I actually started in the industry in patient recruitment. So I started with Accurian, very early days of Accurian, the late 90s when they were just building their practice. Stayed with them to help build the company out, and then moved into the commercial space in pharma to learn a bit more in IMS Health. Spent some time there learning the commercial side of the business, working in South Korea and some other geographies, until I founded the clinical trials division of IMS.
Okay.
So leveraging big data and analytics and predictive analytics to help run clinical trials. And in doing so, I actually was doing a partnership agreement with this company called DrugDev, a small company that was based in London. Had some grand ideas and some good financial backing, and I really fell in love with the vision that they had to really help create a clinical trial operating system for trials. So I joined them as the first U.S. Employee back in 2013 to help, build the company through acquisitions, through partnerships, and then be responsible for some of the commercialization and corporate development.
Okay. So Accurian was the first company you started with in this industry.
That's correct. Yes.
So take me there. I want to go there. So how does an attorney even know about clinical research? Like, how did you find out about Accurian?
Just through networking with some ex legal colleagues of mine.
Okay.
At the time, they were looking for corporate development work. So it was the days that .coms were coming along, new companies were sparking up here and there, and they needed some attorneys to help do some corporate development work. So that's how I learned the industry and I fell in love with it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm always curious because not everyone, but most people stumble into this industry on accident. So I always ask everybody I meet, how did you get started in this industry? So very good. So now take us to DrugDev, okay? You guys are doing a lot of big things. I haven't seen a company grow this quickly in such a short period of time, at least in our industry. This is more like the growth trajectory of a tech company, really. I mean, in our industry, you don't really see that, or you'll see growth by acquisitions, but a lot of the stuff you guys have done have been internal growth. And so you were employee number 1 in the US, right?
That's correct.
So I'm sure you played a huge role in all of this. So first of all, what was the mission of DrugDev when it started? I know I interviewed Melissa back in 2012, but I'd like to hear from you.
Sure. So the mission from DrugDev all along has been about doing more trials. And what we mean there is we want to help reduce the cost it takes to run trials so we can bring more products to market. And that's sort of the overall vision about how we can help drive efficiencies. The real way that we've looked at that from the very beginning was, how do we help create collaboration in the industry? You go to these conferences and you walk around, you'll see 75 different vendors, that many of them are doing the same thing in different software technologies. But what happens is we put our sites, we put our CROs, we put our sponsors in a position that they need to use 16 different vendors to just run a simple trial to activate a site, and someone else for learning management, someone else for payment. And there was a frustration that we had early on that was, how do we help the customers better run the trials more efficiently through technology? So it's all about helping to collaborate in the industry, create some standards so that every company is not running every business process separately, and then producing that all through beautiful technology experiences, which for us is more about an experience you get with a Google or an Uber, that you don't need training for it. You don't, it's very transparent what you have to do.
Right.
So we want to move forward to a day that a clinical trial list or a site comes in and says, there's 3 things I've got to get done to move on. I can do them in a few minutes, and now I can move on and treat the patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I interviewed Melissa, I guess the first problem they were trying to solve, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was investigator selection. So it was PI identification, site identification. Me, as a research site owner at that time, and still am, I looked at drugdev.org as a great tool and free for me to put all my investigators' information out there and then get approached with study opportunities. And so, was that the first problem DrugDev was trying to solve?
It started with site selection, and what happened from there is, as we work with sites, we work with CROs and sponsors, they'd select the site, and then they'd move on to someone else to try to get on a different systems and activate the site, and somebody else to pay. And that's when we first said, this is silly. While we're doing this, why don't we help streamline that process so you don't need to just bounce everyone around the industry?
Now, whose idea was that?
That was probably the initial idea of Melissa, our founder, Hugo Stevenson, our chairman, who's based in Australia, a former or an actual active principal investigator, and was very instrumental in the building of Quintiles. And then our CEO, Ibs Mahmood. Really, the 3 of them had the initial concept of bringing that together, and that's really what I fell in love with when I met the 3 of them.
Yeah, I interviewed Ibs. So he came on relatively early also?
Yeah, so Ibs came on probably a year before I did, and so Ibs was there in maybe 2012. Hugo was one of the angel investors of Melissa's company. They ran it for a few years, and they brought Ibs in when they said they have this grand vision, and you need sort of a mature senior executive to help on this, get some funding.
So Melissa did go the angel route. She went the angel investing route.
Correct.
Okay. And for those who have no idea what we're talking about, just Google or YouTube Melissa Easy, or just YouTube DrugDev. It's probably one of the earlier interviews I did. So it's maybe been 5 years or more ago. And, we talk more about her story, and it's been so long that I forgot. So I'm refreshing my own memory also. But for those of you who are interested, go check that out. So yeah, I didn't realize she had angel investments.
Yes. Yeah. So Hugo and Melissa are both Australian natives and been colleagues for quite some time. So really the company was started by the 2 of them.
Yeah, I should probably interview her again too, just to ask her about those early days, because it's been a while and DrugDev has come so far. I mean, I've been watching since the early days, and now you guys are on par with some of the industry giants, really. So you're doing everything except CRO type work. Is that correct?
Correct. So we look at ourselves as providing the technology platform to run the studies. So many CROs are using our technology and using our associated services with that to help them run certain functions. But we're not a CRO. We work very well with CROs and providing them with the platform to find sites, activate sites, pay sites, consent patients. So a lot of the operational needs of running a study.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I guess, different vendors when you run just one clinical trial. I mean, anyone, even at a site level, will understand very quickly. You get one study and you have to deal with 11 different vendors. I think the average is like 11 or 12 vendors per study, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And we have, examples where someone's working with 16, 17 different vendors on the same study, and it just becomes very cumbersome to do that.
Yeah, 16, 17 different passwords that expire every 90 days. I mean, just keeping track of the vendors alone, forget about actually doing the work, right? That's a job in and of itself. Just remembering who all the vendors are. So was this always the plan for DrugDev? Like, you saw this as an inefficiency And I would imagine in the early days it was Melissa, but eventually you and Ibs came on, and you saw these opportunities.
Yeah, this was very early on, and it's also I'll give credit to our main investor, Invesco Perpetual. Invesco is one of the largest investors in the pharmaceutical industry, and they were frustrated by the cost of running trials and understanding that a lot of the cost drivers are because it's so fragmented. So Invesco had that vision as well. We were sort of executing that, and the focus has been how do we find those related processes and tie them together to make the whole system more efficient, and also in utilizing technology for it. We often find that the pharmaceutical industry and really the clinical trials industry is often years behind just everyday technologies that we use in our daily lives. And that's what we're trying to bring to the industry.
Now, why not try to get into the CRO type work? I mean, you have all the pieces, right? You would just need to have some CRAs. Have you guys considered that?
No, we think, I mean, there's many CROs out there that have fantastic people and great resources to run these studies. But to us, we think that you need to have some neutrality of the systems and platforms that are being used. There's even a big trend in the industry to say, regardless of CRO that you're using, you might use a different CRO because they have expertise in a certain geography or therapeutic area. But the way that you really find some synergies is to use the same processes and the same technology, regardless of who's actually using that. So for us, it's very important to keep some neutrality, keep some ability to make sure that anyone in the industry can utilize our technologies, whether it's 0, 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah. See, I can see that. However, as an entrepreneur, I mean, I'm just looking for market share anywhere I can get. And, I mean, critics of that strategy would say, well, if you're trying to do too much, you actually end up not doing anything at all. So I understand sticking to your core competencies, but you guys have expanded like crazy. So, okay, first it was investigator identification. Then the next natural step was site activation, right?
Yeah, so we had site activation and site payments where it really came hand in
Site
hand.
payments. Yeah, the other day I saw a check here at one of the clinics and it said DrugDev on it. I was blown away. I said, I didn't know you guys are into payments.
And I'm sure it was on time and accurate. So
I don't know about that, but I'm assuming
yeah.
so.
Yeah, so one of the first problems that our advisors asked us to solve is the site payment. And really it's about being accurate payment, being timely, and most importantly, being transparent. Many times a site doesn't even know what they're supposed to be getting paid, or the contracts become so complicated. So
Yeah.
activation and payments, we actually did some of that, or most of that, through acquisition of the leading provider of payments in the industry.
So was that one of your earlier services?
That was one of our earlier ones. We had acquired a company, CFS. I mean, today.
Oh, you guys acquired them. Okay. Okay.
Yes. So today we actually we think we're the second largest payment provider in the industry, just behind Quintiles. So in terms of scale, we're going to process roughly $500 million of site payments just this year.
Now I know who to call when I need a check. Brett and Melissa. Right?
Yes.
Interesting. Yes, CFS, of course I remember them. They were early on in the electronic payments. And then, so do you guys do electronic payments or just send checks? Because here I saw a check, but you guys can do both, right?
Yeah, most of the industry, it is electronic, but it's
Right.
really, it's whatever the site is set up for. So we do it globally.
Okay. Yeah.
It's really based on what the site's set up on, but we do it through, I mean, it's whoever Wells Fargo can pay is, that's how the payments are made.
Interesting. And I mean, I'm launching our CRO actually, and we have our first project. Knock on wood, we start soon. So we're looking at vendors, right? I mean, and we're blown away by the options we have. Now, I can speak from the perspective of the site. Okay. I've never been on the sponsor side. I'm only now getting onto the CRO side and CRA side. I don't know about sponsors. Would CROs, would it benefit them to be transparent about what they're paying the sites? Because I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, but they're very ambiguous on purpose so that a novice investigator, I mean, they're not necessarily trying to screw them over, but hey, if we make it confusing for you to figure out what's going on, maybe we can save some money for ourselves. Like, was there a lot of that going on in the past, and is there still some of that going on now?
I mean, I think there's a lack of transparency, but not for any negative reason. So
Okay.
if you look at the CRO market, for example, when CROs are making payments, and many of the CROs utilize us to help them make payments as well. But when they're making payments, those dollars are very heavily regulated that are coming, through the sponsor, from the
Mm.
sponsor through the CRO. So there was no cost savings associated with that they're looking for. The biggest issue is just being transparent so that from a site perspective, what you're getting paid, when you're getting paid, how to forecast that. And from a
Okay.
CRO perspective, they have the same requirement, especially now with acts like aggregate spend or the Sunshine Act in the U.S.
Yep.
There's a requirement to be very transparent about all the dollars. So I think that from a CRO perspective, we haven't seen CROs that
Can't
are
mess
trying
around
to,
with that. Yeah.
yeah, messing around, but it's not a core competency. It's not something that
Yeah. Yeah.
that says I'm going to be the best payment provider in the world.
Well, that speaks even more volume then, because it was so bad, so vague as to what you're getting, and it still is. In some studies, like, it's almost impossible to figure out what it is that you're owed. It's only natural for sites to assume that, well, this is the CRO trying to get one over on us. I mean, that speaks volumes that that's actually not the case. They
Yeah.
just have no idea what they're doing, and it becomes that way. Like that's just amazing to me. I always assumed, that these CROs were trying to keep some extra money for themselves.
Yeah, I can't speak for everyone, but I don't think I think they'd be in more trouble if they tried to do that. So
I think so too. Okay, so what came after that? So payments, you had the startup.
so,
Obviously, you started with the investigator location service. So what came next?
so after that, the big transformation then was we acquired a company out of Boston called Trial Networks. Trial Networks was founded by two computer geniuses, I should say,
Mm,
computer scientists, but also a medic who's currently our Surgeon General in the U.S. And they had created a platform. Some people would call it would fall into the portal category, but really it was a site sponsor and CRO facing platform that will allow you to do a number of applications of running a trial. So everything from feasibility through learning management system, through document exchange, through safety letters,
mhm.
trackers, and a number of applications that really has become the core of how we can deliver the technology to our audience. So think of it as the same way that you have your iPhone and a series of apps on there. They had built really the iPhone with a series of apps very specific to clinical trials, instead of having multiple iPhones for all your applications.
So trial management, so safety letters, like you said, IRB approvals, things like that.
Exactly, and how to engage with sites. So everything from how do I deliver news and leaderboards
Mhm.
and rewards to sites, to how do I actually train them, and all the way up through some specific processes like how do I distribute safety letters or pass documents back and forth.
I see.
And once we acquired them, then we took some of the technologies and put it on the same platform. So now, instead of having 7, 8 different platforms, now you're consolidating to having one really technology platform.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I know where you need to get the DrugDev Spark. I just think it's important because I'm in the industry, like, heavily involved, and I don't even understand all of what DrugDev offers. So I doubt many of our viewers do. So I hope you don't mind we're going through all these things.
That's
That
quite all
drug.
right. I appreciate
Okay.
it.
But we are getting the DrugDev Spark. So what's next? What's after that?
So the next, I'm going to go through two different things. So next
Mm.
was actually a Transcelerate came along. So
Yep.
Transcelerate, as many folks know, is a collaboration among 18 to 20 major companies that's really promoting um, collaborative ideas with those companies, everything from sharing information on investigators to helping with supplies and other areas. When TransCelerate approached DrugDev, they're really looking for a way that they could consolidate all the investigator information and have a common language of who the investigators are, who all the sites are globally. We had built that for the data bank already, and it was a very natural progression to help TransCelerate do that. So TransCelerate actually joined forces with us, and we're one of the strategic partners to them to help them in what they call the investigator registry, which is really just a way to say, whenever we're talking about Dr. Dan Sfera, every company uses the same ID of, Dan is always 123. The Duke University Medical Center is always clinic ABC. And that data backbone, while sounds mundane sometimes, is incredibly important because of all the redundancy and duplication across the industry. So,
now, was this for investigator selection, or because I'm hearing a lot now about FICO credit score for sites? I know BioClinica was talking about that last year at Scope. There's another group I'm interviewing Monday next week about FICO score for sites. Was this leading up towards that, having a golden number?
So the golden number is an identifier, but not a score for the sites. So really if I step back from this was all those major companies saying they wanted to share all their CTMS data with one another so they could do better site selection. So just the objective data on the investigator. What studies have the investigator done before? How many patients have they recruited? What are the timelines? Those types of metrics.
Okay.
So we created an identifier for that. And it's used for site selection. What we in the TransCelerate companies have agreed to is we are not going to go and put subjective scores on the sites. We're going to present all the stats so that they could talk the same language, but we don't get involved in trying to subjectively score sites because it's not really fair, because there's lots of reasons why a site may have fallen in one tier or another.
Sure.
So it's a little different than, I know there are organizations out there that are trying to put more subjectivity and scoring algorithms. Certainly our tools and applications are used for selecting sites, but we just base everything on pure objective data.
Your numbers, no score, no subjective score.
Correct.
Okay. And so was this a demand from the sponsors or CROs?
This was from the sponsors. This was when the sponsors remember we talked initially of the investigator data bank where 5 companies, Merck, Lilly, Janssen, Novartis, and Pfizer, agreed to share their CTMS with one another. TransCelerate expanded that, so many more companies are sharing the data with one another, but they're all very careful, as is DrugDev, to share data with consent of investigators, but not to put subjective values on the performance of the investigators. We don't want to. We want to be transparent, but we don't want to get into a situation where any of these companies are trying to be subjective in saying yay or nay for investigative sites.
Okay. And I mean, there's so much I can ask. We're getting to Spark. So anything else important along the way before we move on to Spark?
Yeah, so the last piece of the puzzle came the end of last year, where we acquired an electronic informed consent company called Secure.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I interviewed Ibs about that.
Yes, so they're based in Frederick, Maryland. It's the leading e-consent company. I can tell you that when we had our advisory boards the last couple of years, this was the #1 thing that they were all asking about. And it wasn't just about electronic informed consent. It was about how do we better engage with patients, starting with consent. So with that acquisition, we've actually created our first patient solutions group that's focused on how do we help the sites better work with the patient population, whether it's through e-consent, whether it's through simple things like reminders, appointment reminders, or exchanging lab results, or some other areas that they could help with the sites. So this is our new division, Patient Solutions, with the core product being all around informed consent.
Informed consent. What do you think about Esource?
I mean, Esource, interesting, I don't say concept, because it's actually live today.
Yeah, I used one yesterday.
Yeah. So Esource, I mean, fits directly in the data capture, data collection space. I think that, it's the way of the future is, the more Esource, the better your quality of your data is going to be. We generally try to focus on everything operational. There's lots of great players in the data capture space, whether it's eSource or EDC or ePro. And to date, we've really focused on our core has been how do you operate and run these studies while working with all the different data capture companies. So I'm a big fan of eSource and EDC from the data quality, but from a corporate perspective, we look at all those companies as great partners to us, and they have expertise in capturing clinical data. We have expertise in capturing and processing operational data.
Yeah, when I was working with another big tech company in the industry, for those who follow, they'll know they sponsored my blog. I learned through them actually that sponsors, at least the sponsors I was working with through them, they actually care a lot about how research sites are going to react to these new technologies. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, the core premise of our company is how do you make the life of the sites easier?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even going back to our chairman, who's a PI himself, and really what Liz founded the company. If you think about this founding of site selection, it was just about how do we help the sites. So everything we do, we validate with sites, and our perspective on the sites is really more from a global perspective to get a well-rounded view of this. You know, our company was based out of London with people who speak most languages outside of English. You know, they're not native English speakers, many. Right. We can talk to the sites, but again, it's all about what makes sense for the site. Just because we could build a technology doesn't mean it's going to make the life of the site easier.
Right. And then, so how do you know that? I mean, how does DrugDev know what a site wants? Do you guys have good relationships with sites?
So I mean, first of all, we deal with, you know, tens of thousands of sites on all of our solutions on a daily basis. So they're using our solutions all over the place. We do formal surveys. We do a formal global investigator survey every year to understand some more specific areas and trends. But every time we are either building or enhancing a solution or getting feedback, it is always done from a site perspective. So whether that is a number of our people, most of our professional services team are actually ex-study coordinators. So they come from that perspective. Or in many cases, we'll actually have developers that will go out and spend a few days at a site. You know, they'll sit behind an investigator, they'll sit behind the study coordinator, they'll look at how their daily activities, you know, are moving forward, and then they'll find out ways to make it better. So everything we do is based on the site perspective and making sure that we never build anything in a vacuum. It's always with direct site feedback.
I see. Okay. And we'll get back to that if we have time. So DrugDev Spark, I believe, right?
Correct.
Spark. So I'm hearing a lot. What is it?
So DrugDev Spark is a few things. If you think about the solutions that I just went through, whether it's learning management or site activation or payments, we've had solutions that have been in the market for 9, 10, 12 years, you know, tens of thousands of sites, you know, hundreds of thousands of users on it. So there are a number of solutions that were all functional solutions. What we've done with DrugDev Spark is a couple of things. First of all, we've brought them all together under one suite. So they're all, instead of being branded as trial networks or CFS or these legacy things, it's all under DrugDev Spark. Secondly, we've tied together the back-end data for everything so that when you're moving from one module to another, you might select your site and then move on to activation, move on to payments, and there's consistency in the data layer that you're doing there and a workflow. So in many cases, you know, it seems to the user like you're actually using the same exact system when you're moving from feasibility to activation to payments.
Right. And some of our viewers may be thinking, well, that doesn't sound much. It is incredibly difficult to do that from my limited CRO work. I mean, when you try to combine different systems into one platform and get them all to work properly, that is no easy task, right?
Correct. And very practically speaking, so, you know, instead of being a study coordinator or a, you know, at a CRO and saying, I'm going to go into a number of different systems and I pick my site, And now I'm going to move on to the site activation, and I'm going to re-enter my site again and get new IDs and then payments and not keep that information. Just having the information standardized is a huge time savings. It's going to save a lot of the quality issues. So DrugDev Spark is both visually a way to create one brand and one experience, but more importantly is from a workflow perspective, how do you make sure that, in any application you're using, there's a common language behind that. You're not reinventing the wheel each time. So DrugDev Spark for us is not really a product launch because every component has been in the industry for years, but it's really an introduction to bring everything more under one roof.
Yep. I've been saying it for at least 5 years. Whoever can figure out and how to consolidate as many of these different vendors as possible into one system, I mean, they're gonna win. And it sounds like that's what you guys are doing. Now, does this make life easier for the sites or for the CRO and sponsor? Who does it make life easier for?
So for all of them. So from a site perspective, imagine instead of going into a different login for every single study you're working on, and then a different login for every application. So you're going to one system for training and one for contracting. Imagine a site just coming in and saying, oh, let me log in today and see across these 10 studies, these are the 12 activities that I have to get done today to move on. So it makes it very easy for the site to understand, what is my task list for the day and not have to it's not about remembering all the passwords. It's about jumping to different systems. I mean, passwords you can remember by, sticky notes all over the place.
Sure.
So it's really about how do I get one finite list of information, and there's some practical things for the site. So, for example, instead of sending 16 emails a day when you need an activity, there's some practical things where you say, we'll give you one list at the end of the day. Here's the things to move your studies forward. From a CRO and from a study manager, from a sponsor, the same premise stands for them, that they could actually see everything in one fell swoop, but also there's a lot of dashboarding that they can start seeing across my studies. What are the studies that are performing where they should be? What are the studies that are a little bit behind? And what are the metrics underneath each of those?
Now, do you guys do IVRS or IWRS?
We integrate with many IVRS systems.
Oh, you integrate. Okay. So how does that work? Let's say, we're using DrugDev Spark for one of our studies and we have an IVRS, because for me, the biggest issues, and when I say me, I'm talking about a former study coordinator. So for my current coordinators, the biggest issue is EDC, IVRS, and maybe like a portal to get lab results and ECG results. So you're telling me that DrugDev, you can integrate all these things in there?
Yes, so we'll integrate in many different ways. So if you think of the payment side, for example, we need to integrate because often payments are made based on EDC data.
Yes.
So using APIs, or just a fancy word for a way to move data from one system to another, we'll capture the EDC data so we could.
You will. Okay.
Yeah, so we'll get the EDC, the core metrics that are needed to make payments, not the clinical data in there. So we'll get all the data on the milestone so that the payments can be calculated. We also have various, we call them trackers, to understand when, let's say, for example, a patient is showing up in the EDC, but a visit is missing, and we're not sure whether that visit occurred. We're not sure whether it's a data quality issue or the lab data hasn't come through. We'll often integrate with the IVRS, with the lab, with the EDC, and then create some triggers to notify, in many cases, the CRA or the site to say, based on the data that's coming in, it looks like some piece of information is missing. So you can catch those errors early on. Or very practically speaking, we've had situations where, we captured some enrollment data, and the patient stopped showing up because they actually weren't, they had moved. And instead of losing the patient, we were able to pull data together and find out that they actually moved to an area that there was another site, and they continued in the study.
Interesting. So this really happened recently, or?
That happened a couple years ago in a study that we actually, through one of our trackers, we were able to keep a patient in the study just
tracker. See, we didn't even talk about that. So you guys are doing a whole lot of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of just any time that a operations person has a business issue that can be solved by data from disparate systems, some of our, we call them the trackers, some our ability to pull that data together and pull out some insights.
Mm.
Those are some of the unique insights that we're able to pull together and make it real actionable.
So when are you guys getting into patient recruitment? Because that's huge.
It's a great question. So for years, we've met with patient recruitment companies. We've been looking around the industry. We've tried a few things. Patient recruitment is a very difficult area,
Yeah.
both to use technology to consolidate to find the best solution and to find ones that actually make financial sense. So
Yep.
we're always on the lookout for great patient solutions in the recruitment area. We focus more on retention
Yeah.
in some areas. But certainly we're always keeping our eyes and ears open for either organic ideas or other companies that have made some headway in that area.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, we talk about EHR. We could talk about that. I'll spare you the time. I know you gotta go. Um, what I've seen with patient recruitment, it's an awareness problem. Not only an awareness for the patients themselves. I mean, very few patients. I think it's like 1% of patients out there. And we're all patients, by the way, but 1% of everyone out there knows what clinical research is. And then there's the rest. There's 99%, right, that don't. So they're not going to Google for a clinical trial in their area. So you have an awareness problem. The issue with that is it requires a lot of upfront work. It also wouldn't hurt if the physicians who have large private practices would do more research. Now, and so this is one of the things my CRO is trying to focus on. We're training research naive sites because we do a whole bunch of consulting for sites across the country. And what we've noticed was a lot of the research naive physicians would stumble across one of my videos, call me. Once I got to like number 30 of this happening, I said, maybe there's something here. I think having these research naive physicians they have to have their own private practice. They can help tremendously in raising awareness. The problem is no one wants to do the hard work that it takes to get them experienced in research. So I think there's a lot of ways you can go about this using technology or just using good old-fashioned sweat equity, which is kind of what we're doing. But whoever can figure this out, I mean, there's like a whole new industry just for that.
I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head that there's both the patient awareness, but also it's increasing the site pool. I think the area that we have focused on is, not necessarily increasing the site pool by us actively recruiting naive sites to increase that, but really to make the process as easy as possible. So I think that the more that we can make this operational process easy, like, it's like your Uber app, for example.
Yep.
I think that'll be much more attractive to have research naive sites become new sites.
That certainly helps because there's another alarming stat. I think it's like 80% of physicians or even more that do their first trial never do another trial.
That's exactly right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's probably even higher than 80, but I mean, so you guys are working on that end. We're working on the other side of trying to raise awareness and getting physicians interested. So I think it's going to take a combination of different efforts to pull this off.
Correct. I couldn't agree more.
Thank you, Brett. I appreciate it. I know you got to go. Really quick, how many employees does DrugDev have now?
We have about 330 employees now.
330, and you were literally number one, or like
well, I was first US when I joined. We had about 25 people in London, so maybe I was number 26.
How many in London now?
We have about 60 in London.
Is that corporate, or is corporate in Pennsylvania?
We've moved corporate to right outside of Philadelphia is corporate. We have about 150 there, the main office, and as a Delaware corporation, it makes it sort of easier just to have the corporate headquarters there. But we're in
those Delaware corporations.
Yeah, we're in Boston, we're in Philadelphia, we're in London, and we're in Frederick, Maryland.
Okay, that's from the informed consent group.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay, and what's next for you guys? I mean, we're trying to predict here. Patient recruitment, you're kind of dropping some hints, but it's going to be difficult. Risk-based monitoring?
So, we're always exploring areas, but I think we've got the core of the operational platform we think that we have that underway. We're always looking at new areas. The bigger focus for us right now is we're moving with our clients to more and more enterprise implementations. So clients are getting a better appetite for let's not purchase or let's not implement processes and technologies across studies. Let's actually implement across the enterprise. So there's a bit of us that really we focus. We spend a bit of time adding capabilities and then more time actually making sure that we don't just become a portfolio company, but we're actually helpful as we implement it across the enterprise. So I think that's what you'll see probably more of this year is more of the enterprise implementations than trying to add on little nuts and bolts here and there.
Sure. And not to speak for you, but you would not consider getting into EDC because they integrate already with your platform. So there'd be no need to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we are always exploring areas that are going to become more efficient for us.
Sure.
But I would say in general, you know, the EDC market, it's becoming a more and more mature market, and we need to work with all the EDC vendors. So we need to make sure that our platform is able to pull in data from whoever the EDC vendor might be, or the ePro vendor, or the eCoa vendor as a whole.
Yeah, and I know you may not be allowed to speak about this, and I know you've said, and Ibs has said, and Melissa has said, there's zero chance you guys will ever become a CRO. But I'll make a prediction as monitoring gets more centralized, a company such as yours, or someone else out there, could benefit tremendously from using these tools, technology, the data to effectively pull it off. It will just be a different form of monitoring. So you don't need to answer that, but prediction, all right?
Yep, and that's a fair prediction. And I think the one thing that I can say very confidently is, while we could never commit to anything, everything that we're looking at is just if there's a better way to run trials more efficiently, then we're always open to it. So that's the beauty of our team is we have to be very flexible to move with a new way to make the trials more efficient.
Yeah, a lot of my CRA colleagues are scared that algorithms are going to replace them. And I said, you know what? I think you've got like another 10 to maybe 20 years, but who knows what's going to happen in 2040, right?
That is true.
All right. Thank you, Brett. And thank you, Guru Nation, for watching. And also those of you on the brand new clinicalscoop.com. I appreciate it a lot, Brett, from DrugDev. And come back on anytime, okay?
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.